Good morning, everybody. This is Nick Kwiatkowski from Michigan State University. You're watching an IAUG webinar on SIP troubleshooting tools. Just a really quick webinar, the agenda, we're going to do a quick housekeeping. Going to talk about the typical SIP architecture in an ARA environment, talk about the session manager, system manager, communication manager, session border controllers, and then some other ways to troubleshoot. And then we'll follow up with a Q&A. So a little bit about myself. I'm the manager of the Unified Communications team at Michigan State University. I'm also an adjunct professor in the College of Communication Arts and Sciences at Michigan State University, teaching telecommunications topics, data networking, network security, and things like that. Also part of the Lansing Makers Network, which is a makerspace here in Lansing, Michigan. And I'm also a member and committer and a PMC member of the Apache Foundation. I'm sure you've heard of like the Apache HTTPD project and quite a few other things, but it's a nonprofit association for software development and open source software. So this presentation is going to primarily cover technologies in a typical Avaya Communication Manager / SIP-based environment. So I'm going to be showing a communication manager or a system manager 8.1 system. But pretty much everything I'm going to be talking about is going to be available in 6.1 and beyond. Whenever there's anything that's different, I will be mentioning what that's going to look like and how it operates a little bit differently. As you probably know, there are some slight variations between different versions in System Manager, but pretty much all the same tools are available for you. We are going to be talking about Avaya Communication Manager. Specifically, I'm on a 7.x release of Communication Manager, but I will still show those types of things. Via System Manager, obviously the 8.1, Session Manager 8.x, and the Avaya Session Border Controller for Enterprise as well. So this pretty much this webinar is going to be talking about different type of SIP troubleshooting tools, and kind of going back, way back when everybody used ASA and all that type of stuff, when pretty much Communication Manager was the central focus of the entire universe. It was great because you pretty much had a really limited set of tools to figure out what was going on with your system. Where did a call come in? Did it hit this trunk? All this other type of stuff. There was one, the most powerful tool out there was List Trace. It was available to pretty much all customers, at least, in the last 10 years or so. But it gave you a really good view of what was happening with anything kind of going on. And that's not really the case anymore. So it used to be that, as we've moved to SIP, Communication Manager is no longer the center of that, that universe, that communication world. Communication Manager has kind of become just a feature server, so it really only sees just a really limited set of stuff that that's happening to it. So that's happening in your world. It's quite possible that nowadays that you get a call coming in from your provider, it goes through a session border controller, goes to session manager, and then it goes directly to an adjunct. CM may never see that particular call, and that becomes a problem. So so in a typical SIP architecture environment, these are the different types of components that you're going to be seeing. You're going to have the PSTN, session border controller, a session manager, communication manager is still a part of it, and then you're going to have a series of phones. So when a call comes in, starts with the PSTN, goes to the session border controller. Session border controller is essentially your firewall. Think of it as this is the place where your calls are going to be. Think of it as like your kind of your gateway for like your ISDN, PRIs, and all that type of stuff. So after the session border controller, make sure that the voice path is correct, everything is good. It's going to send it over to your session manager. Your session manager is then going to figure out, okay, what happens with this call? It's going to actually dip down to Communication Manager. Hey, is this a station? Is the station registered? All that type of stuff. Communication Manager says, yeah, it's registered. In fact, it's a SIP phone. Let's send it over to the SIP phone. Communication Manager sends it back to Session Manager, which then sends it back to the SIP phone. If we're talking about a call that is like an H323 call, a digital call, an analog call, pretty much the same thing. Call goes from PSTN to the Session Border Controller. Session Border Controller says, yep, this is a good call. It goes to Session Manager. Session Manager sends it down to Communication Manager. But what's different in this case is then Communication Manager is then responsible for routing that to the phone. So it does not go back up to the Session Manager. So this here is just a kind of a brief thing, a brief diagram of the different components that are going to be required or that are going to be your kind of your tap points to figure out what happens with a call. Now, it is quite possible that you have a call come in and from the Session Manager, it goes to, let's say, a voicemail directly or an IVR or something like that, in which case Communication Manager doesn't ever see that. It's also quite possible that you have an ISDN call that goes directly from the PSTN to Communication Manager, in which case your Session Border Controller and Session Manager may never see that call too. So you need to get a little bit smart of where these types of calls are going to be, where you're going to be able to see these types of calls and where you might see different types of errors and what type of components are involved. That's what we're going to be talking about in this session. So the other thing to kind of talk about as well is where do these different components get their configuration data, or where do they get programmed? So when we're talking about the Session Border Controller, there's a separate, in particular the Avaya Session Border Controller for Enterprise, they have a separate tool known as the EMS. The EMS is a web-based tool that actually pushes configuration out to the Session Border Controller. Some setups may have them in a combo server. Quite a few setups, they actually have them separate. In fact, the Avaya recommendation is that the EMS is a separate application for security. Now, we're talking about Session Manager and Communication Manager. As I'm sure you guys are all aware now, the System Manager is now the master database and the tool that you use to program these devices. You don't actually, there's no actual tool that you can directly use to program a Session Manager. Everything has to happen through System Manager. Now with Communication Manager, you can actually still do your own individual programming in that using ASA or any other type of tool like that, but the recommendation is to use System Manager because when we start talking about SIP phones, particularly like SIP hard phones, there's a lot of things that you will not see in Communication Manager as far as like fields and functions and all that type of stuff that you will see in System Manager when you're programming it that way. So the tools. So the first tool I'm going to talk about is System Manager. So Avaya System Manager is the primary database for multiple servers and services in the environment. The trick with it is it does not do any real-time processing. You won't actually see any live traffic, but it does get that historical data. Since it controls the configs in the databases, it can actually emulate some decisions that would happen in the system. So 1,000-foot view, again, System Manager can tell what devices are registered to your Session Managers. It can tell you routing decisions, what routing decisions will happen based on input criteria, and it can tell you historical data such as the load of the servers, how many calls, all that type of stuff. But you will not actually see live calls in any of the tools in System Manager. So I'm going to go through just some of these System Manager tools and things that you can actually, like some of the data that you can get out of these things here. So let me go and pull up my System Manager. So this is on my live system right now. So System Manager, this particular version that you're seeing here is System Manager 8.1. If you are used to a older version of System Manager, such as the 7.x or 6.x series, it does look a little bit different. But even though the main screen looks a little bit different, all the same functions are there. You used to have like a white box on the left side that had all the user stuff, and then in the middle you had elements, and then you had services. Well, guess what? They're also there. They're just now in a menu. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is call counts. So this is a great diagnostic tool for you to figure out how many calls have actually been processed on my System Manager or on one of my Session Managers or in pretty much anywhere. So I can go to get to any of these, you would go to Session Manager, and I usually start at the dashboard because it gives you this nice little menu here on the left-hand side. You would go to Performance, and then we can go to Call Counts. So in the call counts, I can start to see all the call counts that hit a particular entity. So if I, for example, want to see all the calls that went to my AACC server in the last 7 days, I can select, my AACC SIP entity, date and time, last 7 days, and I can hit Generate Graph. So this here gives me a nice quick view of how many calls got processed for each one of these time spans. Now, each one of these time spans generally can be 5 minutes. When you zoom in and out, there are different time spans. So I can say in the last day, and I can see about how many calls were processed. Now, in the System Manager world, when they say a call is processed, they mean an invite packet was sent. That does not mean a call was completed or anything like that. It just means that an invite packet, that the session managers saw an invite packet go across. You can also do different time ranges as well. So I can say in the last hour, how many did I see? Again, 70 calls in that particular time right there, ending at 10:20. So this is particularly useful for seeing overutilization of adjuncts, overloading of systems, routing loops, all that type of stuff. That gives you a really good view of what's happening there. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is location performance. So location performance, as you start building out your SIP environment, you're going to be setting up different locations, typically for different adjuncts, different routing instances and things like that. So I can actually do pretty much the same thing as an entity. I can see how many SIP calls were processed over the last day to my carrier. Now there's a couple of different graphs that show up with this. There's the call count, which again, number of SIP invite packets that were sent back and forth. And then they also have the bandwidth usage. Now the bandwidth usage is only going to be useful if you set up something like CAC. That's the essentially you assign bandwidth values for each type of call. I've not done that, so right now I'm showing that the bandwidth usage going out to my carrier is in the kilobits a second. That's not true. It's actually something like 40, 50 megabits a second. But the call counts are correct because it's actually counting just the number of SIP invite packets that come across. So again, this here can be very useful again to detect things like routing loops or how busy is my circuit or things like that. So in my particular case here, I need to watch out because going out to my carrier, I'm actually capped by the carrier at I think 600 call count. And you can see here, I'm actually hitting the 80% mark here fairly often. It looks like around noon yesterday. And if I actually zoom out for a couple of days, see I actually get there fairly close. So I'm hitting, now say the 80%, I'm probably about the 60% range right there on a regular basis, but this is good for me to know for any type of call planning and things like that. Another thing to look at here is the SIP performance. So SIP performance is gives you information on a particular ASM's view of performance either globally or by entity or by a particular IP address. So I can say, okay, session manager 1, which is one of my 2 session managers I have in my environment, tell me in the last day the total number of calls that it processed. So over here I get a couple of different things. I get the number of messages per second. I get the SIP requests and responses. I can get the number of errors, which is also very useful. And by the way, an error would be a 500 or a 404 coming back. These are the number of messages a second for the default policy, all sorts of information here. Again, I got call counts over here, so this shows the number of calls that were processed in any given moment on that particular session manager. Now, what's neat with this too is I can also say, okay, so from session manager to, let's say, one of my entities, in this case here, I'm going to say to, let's do AACC again. So from session manager 1 to my AACC, how many errors did I get? How many responses and requests? All that type of stuff. I can also do per IP address. I can pick out, let's say, one particular phone, and I can say all the traffic going out to that particular phone or that particular entity link or things like that from session manager 1. Again, I can break this out by a certain time span as well. So I can say session manager 1 total, give me the graphs, and over here it shows in the last hour the number of calls that, with pretty good detail that were processed. So that is the SIP performance. Other things to just note really quick too, under system performance, you can also see certain types of data about, let's say, session manager 1. What's my CPU load? Right now it's like 0%, 1%. The amount of memory, disk space, management network use, the HTTP load, and the SIP load, and all that type of stuff on here as well. Good things to know if you're having a session manager or you think you're having a network issue where traffic isn't being processed properly. So going back to the PowerPoint really quick here. So I really talked about these, the call counts, location performance, the SIP performance, and now we're going to talk about the tracer tools. So jumping into the system tools section here and the tracers. So tracers are something that has greatly improved in System Manager 8.1, And what it allows you to do is allows you to do traps on certain types of calls and actually capture that SIP traffic automatically. It's not real time, but it is close to real time. So one of the examples I gave last time I did this presentation is for 911 calls. I can actually set up a trap that goes to an SNMP server, so it can go to like HP OpenView or whatever else that you're using, to trigger to let like a network performance group or your operations center or even a security desk or something like that to know when they dial a particular number. Now you can also set up user filters different ways as well. So every time, let's say, a VIP person calls an international number, you can set it up so that it does an SNMP trap. Or you can say these particular groups of users always seem to have issues when they call the area code 616 or something like that. You can actually set up user filters or call filters so that you can keep a track of, you can capture all the SIP traffic that happens on those particular cases. To use the tracer configuration, you click a checkbox next to one or both of your session managers or however many session managers you have. You click view, that would open it up. Then you can say tracer enabled, and then I can choose all the different types of traffic do I want. Do I want the network to security module to network, security module to security module, or server to security module, drop packets, number of drop packets. I can also set up my filters as well. Okay, this has to be greater than or equal, let's say over here. I don't know why it always makes me fill that out, but I can say from any user to 911. I don't care what the source is. I don't care what the destination is. How many SIP packets do I want to actually capture? Now I can also set up on my session manager the syslogs. So again, those can go to like your automated tools to capture this type of data. I'm not going to hit commit right now because this is on my production system. There's not really a huge performance degradation if you do this, but I'm not going to do it right now just for the demo because I've got already a view set up. So I would hit commit, and then after a few moments, it would start capturing that type of traffic. What is important though is the maximum message count. How many packets do you want to capture of your SIP traffic? Again, this is not voice traffic, just SIP traffic for every time that one of these filters actually gets triggered. So if I go to the SIP trace viewer, so every time that the trace has captured data, I now can get a view of this type of thing. So again, think of the use case of I know this particular VIP calls this international number and they say that they have problems all the time, but they're doing it in a time when I'm not working or I'm not available or things like that. This over here can give you that historical data. So I can say on Session Manager 1, I know that I captured some data a little while ago. I can hit View. And this over here will pull back all of those packets that were done in the SIP tracer. Now, again, this is completely searchable. So I can say, okay, show me every invite that happened. And I can do an apply on here, and this shows every invite. I can show every time that somebody called the number 26200, which happens to be our help desk. And this over here shows every SIP packet that went to 26200, shows the information. I can hit show on here. It'll show the whole SIP packet that's happening for that particular invite that happened. I can search by call IDs. I can do tracing entities, the froms, really anything that you can search on. That's that's where you go. You can export these traces as well. You can export them as a PCAP file or just as a text file so you can review later on. So for example, if you know that you on occasion get an issue with your carrier, this particular set of scenarios happens, you can have the system automatically trace those when you hit certain scenarios, save that up, and then you can send that to the vendor to figure out what's going on. So the other tool that in System Manager that's extremely important is the call routing test. The call routing test is a way for you to emulate what would happen if a particular call invite were to happen going across one of your session managers. So System Manager can get unwieldy, can get very complicated when you're setting up particularly dialing rules or things like that, or you get in a situation like, why the heck does this happen? So this is a situation, or this is a screen that you can actually input all this information and figure out what's going on, and figure out why did System Manager or Session Manager route a call a particular way. So the screen did change a little bit in 8.1. In fact, 8.1.1, the very latest pack, they added quite a few cool little things in here. So the older screen does look like this. This is from 6.4 up through 7.1 without feature pack 1, or 8.1 without feature pack 1 here. But you would have a called party URI. You need to have the full SIP URI, so that includes your domain, the calling party, the data time. So if you have dialing rules based off data time, what session manager instance, the calling party address, the listening port, and then you can execute the test, and then it's going to output its decision tree. And I'm going to show that here live in just a second. Now, one thing that is new with System Manager 8.1.1 is it'll also show you what is expecting, like when you put those information, that those properties in there, what does the original invite look like? What did System Manager or Session Manager do with it with adaptations and all type of stuff, and what is the difference? So that is useful to figure out, okay, is System Manager mangling my data? Is it mangling my invites when it's sending it off somewhere else? So let's go and show that here live. So calling party IP address, in this case here, I'm going to say that a call came in from 172.24.53. What address am I using here? .12. The calling party, so this is the, where did it come from? So I'm going to say it came from 225.28 at msu.edu. And then the called party, who or what number did I actually call? I'm going to be calling 54656 at msu.edu. Wednesday is fine. I'm using Session Manager 1. I'm going to be using TLS on port 5061. So when I go and execute this, essentially System Manager is going to say, okay, what's actually happening? So it says here the routing decision, the total routing decision here was it's going to route that particular call to core CM stations, which is my entity link. Terminating location is COM manager. Well, that's pretty cool. And how did it get to this decision? It says here it took a look at it. It didn't match a dialing plan. It did match on 5, but that wasn't enough. And it says here, oh wait, this call is a known user. It's going to continue on here, and it's going to say, oh wait, this needs to go over to communication manager station. So it goes through every single reason why did it route a particular way. Now I can go and change this here to say 517-884-7999, and it's going to be calling 517-267, this particular thing right here. And when I hit execute, well, gee, that's weird. It said that if 404 route not found. Why was that? It said couldn't match on that number, couldn't match on this number, couldn't match on this other number. Well, that's why that came in. If I change what address something came from, this one here says, oh wait, this one here is routing through, it's going to actually route it to my communication manager in the Windstream trunk. And why did it do that? It says, well, it picked up on a particular phone number. Oh, if I start at the beginning here, it says, oh, I picked up on 517-267. It's doing some adaptations. It's going through here, and it says, well, I'm going to be sending it over to this right here, and you can kind of read through it. Again, what's neat about this here is I can see the invite. This is what I supposedly sent into the system. This is what got sent out with all the other Avaya stuff added to it, the different routes, the location, the charge vector, all that type of stuff is in here. So a really, really cool tool to figure out without having to place live calls. It allows you to figure out where the heck is my call going to go before I actually go and place that call. The other place that is extremely useful for any type of session manager work is just the user registrations. So if I go to the session manager section again, I go to system status, so that's this other drop down over here, and I go to user registrations. Now, user registrations is a tool that's going to show you every single user that is registered to one of your session managers in your system. Shows great details such as IP addresses, MAC addresses, models of phones, event subscriptions, registration history, AST registrations, all that type of stuff. So if I take a look at my extension, for example, which is 22528, it's going to show right now I've got 3 phones logged in. I'm allowed up to 4. They are all Avaya devices, so these are AST devices, meaning that they have full event subscriptions and all that type of stuff. I can go and pick one of these over here. I can find out the model numbers. Let's see here. Right now, this is a J100 series phone. I know that's currently registered to Session Manager 1. Here's the IP address of it. Or sorry, this is where it's currently registered to. Here's the MAC address of my phone, so I can find that on the network if I need to. The event subscriptions are very important when you're starting to deal with issues of PPM. So things like button data is not working, voicemail is not updating, like the voicemail light's not updating, all that type of stuff. You need to see Avaya event registration subscriptions in order for all those things to start working. When you have generic devices, let's say a Cisco phone connected to your system manager, you're going to get SIP 19. You're not going to get these event subscriptions. You may actually get message summary, which is MWI, but you might not get others. So in the registration, you're also going to see other things such as what was the last time that the phone updated its button data or contact data and all that type of stuff. The active controller, so what SIP server, so session manager, is currently in control of that device. All the other type of information here. There's also a useful history tab here, shows, okay, for the last, I think it's 6 or 7 registrations or 8 registrations, what MAC address, what vendor, what type, what model, what version of device registered to this particular endpoint. Again, particularly useful because you say, okay, so this particular user says that they called with an Avaya communicator endpoint, but they weren't able to get in. This allows you to at least find the MAC address and history, what version they were connecting with, and all that type of stuff, even if they're not currently registered. Simultaneous also shows who's currently registered. You actually see that on the same screen here too. But if I look at some other endpoints, looks like this one here, they're all ASTs as well. Yep, so all the ones I'm thinking of right now are all gonna be AST-based devices. So we're gonna be getting all that information. I was hoping to find a generic one on here, but it's not. So this is the session manager user registrations. Again, really, really useful. Again, gives you a great idea of, is a user registered properly and all that stuff. Again, primary and secondary server registrations too. Are they only able to talk to one of the 2 session managers, for example, is also something that's very useful. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. And I think we're done with the system manager stuff. So we talked about the user registrations. Yep. All right, so troubleshooting tools in the session manager itself. Now, I mentioned that the session manager doesn't have a programming interface, but it does actually have a tool that allows you to see real-time calls coming through. Again, the real-time calls are only going to be the calls that that session manager would see. So if, let's say you have an environment like mine, where you have 2 session managers, both session managers are not going to see every single call. However, you should get a pretty good idea of what the general flow of a call is, and you can do the diagnosis on there. So session manager processes SIP packets from one endpoint to another. It also handles the SIP registration of endpoints. ASM itself has no UI to administer via and is administered via System Manager. There is a command line tool available to see real-time traffic. And again, remember, it only sees the data that flows through it. So the tool we're going to be talking about is Trace SM, and the S and the M is actually capital. Those are available via SSH. It requires a customer or a Avaya login to a shell to execute it. It does require an SSH client. I recommend a tool, either Secure CRT or MOBA Xterm. I know Avaya themselves do recommend PuTTY, but PuTTY doesn't have things like file transfer tools built into it and a bunch of other stuff, why it's not a great tool. But PuTTY and MOBA Xterm are actually free tools. Again, I would highly recommend using either Secure CRT, which I think is like $100 or something like that, or MOBA Xterm. To fire it up, to access it, fire up your SSH client and log in. From the base tool, type in the command trace SM, and then you get into the wonderful tool. So we'll go show that right now. So this here is going to be our session manager, and I'm going to go log in. So from here, I'm going to type the command trace SM and then hit enter. So when I hit the enter key, it's going to load up the tool eventually. There we go. And in the tool, you're going to see a couple of items along the bottom, and then this thing that says press S to start capture. Now, for most environments, pressing S to start capturing and just going is not going to provide a whole lot of useful information. a few things. The trace SM tool by itself is going to be limited to 10,000 packets. That means that you don't, for a very busy switch, you don't typically have a lot of time to watch this data go across. You can't like keep it running all day to see what's happening and all that stuff. You have to be there for a particular reason. Now, with all that in mind, there's a couple of items along the bottom here. One is going to be this S to start, Q to quit. Those should be pretty obvious. S to start a capture, Q to quit the program. There's going to be F for filters. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. Write, that will write anything that's currently in the buffer out to disk so that you can share that file with other people. The other one that's very useful is clear. That's going to clear your buffer. Again, that buffer can only have 10,000 packets. The other two things we're going to talk about are going to be R for RTP and D for calls. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is F for filter. I just hit the F key. It's going to show you this little box over here that's going to say, this is how you use a filter. And it's kind of nuanced. But the things that you're really going to want to concentrate on are going to be either the U or the I. So if I type in -U and then I type in a phone number, let's say 22528, is going to show any packet that has either in the true or the to or the from the phone number 22528 in it. Now it could also be 517-432-2528. That's also going to include it, or it's going to be just 22528. Now, if I want to filter by an IP address, I can do -I space and then the IP address, and then that will filter for any packets to or from that IP address. So right now I'm just going to show my station. Now it still hasn't started yet, but I can hit the S key to start. And when I hit the S key to start, it's going to give me a couple of options. It's going to say, do I want to capture SIP, PPM, call processing, or TLS handshaking? SIP is going to be a typical, like the SIP ladder that shows like the invites, the options messages, the refers, all that type of stuff. It's going to show all that going across between any device that matches that filter. PPM is going to show any HTTP calls that your phone, or HTTPS calls that your phone is doing to transmit data. So PPM is where an Avaya phone is going to do like the button date. It's going to do your contacts. It's going to do configuration information about dial plans. It's going to do information about, it's going to do all sorts of information. So that's useful if you're having a problem where button data isn't showing up or contacts aren't updating, or you dial, let's say, a code for an agent to log in and it's not getting there, or you're not seeing like send all calls is another one where you get the initial button data, but things like send all calls, call forwarding, all that stuff isn't being updated on the phone. Why could that be? That's going to tell you why. Call processing is very similar to the system manager call processing. It's going to show the decision tree of why a particular call routed the way it did. And then TLS handshaking is going to show all the TLS packets and why, or either if it was accepted or if it wasn't accepted, why was it not accepted. Now, the two that we have on, the two bottom ones, the call processing and the TLS handshaking, that is going to show data for every single call going through your system. That means that if the system is busy, you may not necessarily see your particular call coming through. The reason being is call processing is the entire decision tree, so it's going to hit before any of those filters are going to take place. The TLS handshaking is going to be one of those where it doesn't know anything about the packet before it opens it up. This is going to show the entire process of a packet being opened up. So right now we're going to show just the SIP. I'm going to hit the enter key and it's going to start capturing data. You're going to see along the top over here, the captured packets and the displayed packets are going to start counting up. And I'm going to go place a phone call. So I'm just calling my voicemail. And then I hung up. So you see on here it's showing the ladder diagram of everything that's happening with my particular phone because I filtered on 22528. And I can scroll up here and I can see a bunch of additional data on it. So I can see that initial invite coming from my phone, which is this first line over here, going to SM100, which is the security interface, or essentially the SIP interface of a session manager. And you see right here a nice little diagram of that here. If I hit the enter key, it shows the full SIP packet that's going back and forth. If the SIP packet was a lot longer than just this little bit of screen here, you can actually scroll up and down by hitting the up and the down arrow key. So this over here again shows this is the address it came from. Port, used TLS, came over here, port, shows a quick summary. It was a SIP with all the information on here, the to and the from, and all this other stuff. So there you go. If it was a more complicated thing where I was calling from, let's say, a cell phone or something like that, you'd see all the different players going across here. Again, from my SM100, I've got the invite going to the voicemail with all the additional information about voicemail, or that voicemail needs on here. So there we go. So if I were to show the same thing here with PPM data, actually I won't see any PPM data right now because the phone's not necessarily restarting, but that's where you'd show PPM data. If I were to show call processing, this is gonna get really busy really quick here, because you see right here, my system says it's processing 21.4 messages a second. That might be a problem, but we're just gonna do something. Hopefully we capture a call process.
Please enter your password.
I'm gonna hit stop right here, and it's gonna go and keep on counting up. Hopefully we see some data coming across. We may not necessarily do it. All right. And it looks like I need to do another capture here with some SIP traffic. Let me go and call another station. So the other thing that's very useful with this right here too is you can hit the R key to see how is the RTP data actually going to work with this. Actually, I need to do one more packet here because I need some RTP data coming across my phone. Now this is a simulation of what would the RTP data look like. Not the actual RTP data, because it never actually flows across that session manager. But if as I'm scrolling up through here, we see all the invites, we see the notifies, we see all the stuff. But over here, we're seeing a new line that's going to come up over here, G711 mu. So this over here is letting me know that the system is actually expecting RTP traffic to flow from this particular IP address, G711 mu, to this IP address right here, that port. And you're going to see this over here as well. So from my 172.24.58 and 10, I'm going to be sending RTP traffic to my phone. Again, it's going to be G711 mu. So this is not data that you typically would get from a normal ladder diagram. You would definitely not get this data from Wireshark, but because Session Manager knows stuff about your phone, it's going to be able to report that back. Yep. How does it get that data? It's actually going to be reading the SDP information and going from there. So one last, two more things I wanted to show is writing out some SIP traffic. So let me go place another test call. Oop, helps if I actually capture some data here. Okay, hung up. Okay, there's a bunch of traffic over here. I'm going to turn off RTP mode. So there's a bunch of traffic here. Let's say I just caught something that my carrier is doing weird. I need to fix it, or I need to tell somebody about this. I can hit the W key to write these packets out. When I hit the W key, it's going to say, give me a file name, and then it's going to give me a few options. So the file name in this case here is, what do I want to save this as? Let's say, hello world. Could be the date, could be the time, could be whatever, what the issue is. This is the name of the file name. And then I have the choice, display just the filtered packets. So when I set up my filter, what data am I saving? I can have the unfiltered logs, anything that is in the buffer, or I can say every log in my system write to this file. In my case, I just want the first two. I want the unfiltered and the filtered. I can hit OK. It's going to write all those out. And there we go. I'm going to show how to open that up here in just a moment. So the last thing I wanted to show in Session Manager is the ability to show real-time calls. So when you are in here, even if you and you're capturing SIP traffic, when you see calls going across here, I can actually hit the D key. And this is a view that's going to show all the calls going live in my system, the inbound, the outbound, and all that type of stuff in a nice view that's not a ladder diagram. So this here is really nice to capture trends. Let's say people are saying that, hey, we keep on calling this particular phone number, nothing's happening. And I can see that we're getting some spam calls right now. That's all these rejected 404 not founds. So this gives me the ability to see what's happening in real time. Now what's neat too is these calls, as they're progressing, are actually updating. So you see some over here just hung up. There's some over here, this one here got canceled, this one here just updated as well. So what's neat about these is I can go and highlight one of these, hit the enter key, and then it shows the ladder diagram for just that call. So if I don't really know what I'm looking for, I want to see a picture of everything that's happening on the system, but I can't do it in like, 1,000 pages a second of all the SIP traffic going across. That D key is really useful to show me like a general view of what's going on. On the right side here, it does show a really basic ladder diagram of the different pieces and parts that are being involved with a particular call. So this one here, I know without even looking at it, says it's going from my communication manager, Proctor, going to session manager sending it to Windstream. And if I go hit the enter key on here, it shows that, and that's exactly what happened. So a call went out and it processed successfully. It rang and then they hung up. So that is what we have for the session manager. So when I exit out of the session manager tool, a couple things to note. When you exit, you almost always want to hit the C key to clear the buffer, and then you want to hit the Q key to exit. Now, if you just close Secure CRT or PuTTY or whatever you might have, that terminal may still be running and it may still be capturing data and it may still be slowing down your system. So you always want to make sure you clear your buffer and hit the Q key to exit. Now that file that I wrote out, if I hit the LS key or I hit LS, you can see right over here it says hello world.tgz. That's a file I can then download to my computer and open up later on. Again, the nice thing about Secure CRT is there is a built-in file transfer tool. I can just drag this over and away we go. I've now downloaded that and I can send that to my vendor to process or send to Avaya or whatever you might have. Oh, let me go back. So these are all the different things that we talked about. Again, these are in the handouts as well. This should look pretty similar. Okay. Oh, the other thing I want to mention too is if you ever want to open up that save file to figure out what else is going on, you can do the trace sm command and then the name of the file that you saved. So example, hello world.tgz. It says that, hey, this is contains some unfiltered logs. Do I want to open those instead? Sure. And it's actually going to go open up those logs. It's going to go and allow me to do all my filtering and do everything else that I wanted to do. Looks like this was a bad idea because it's a really big file. But we can jump back to that later on. Trust me, it's there. Okay, communication manager, because we're kind of running really low on time here. I'm just going to kind of blow through this right here. The trace tools that you've been using for years in communication manager are exactly the same, list trace. The only thing that's different is if you want to see additional SIP traffic, you can do list trace station, your phone number or your extension number, and if you do /s, it's going to show additional SIP information. What's really neat about that is it shows the full SIP packets as you're going through. So this is the view from communication manager of any SIP traffic. Unfortunately, it's pretty hard to export, but at least you can see that it's there. Troubleshooting tools in the Session Border Controller for Enterprise. So again, there's two tools that we're going to be dealing with. One is the EMS, and the other one is the SBC appliance itself. The SBC appliance, so very similar to the Session Manager side. The EMS is your version of System Manager. The SBC is the actual Session Manager. Some installs may have these combined into a single server. So I'm going to go log in, and then we're going to go and really quickly show the troubleshooting the packet capturing stuff within System Manager. Oh, that's still opening. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to go into the SBC, and I, of course, waited too long, so let's go log back in. There we go, so I'm logged in. So areas that you can actually get some data for the SBC, if you go to inside the EMS, device-specific settings, troubleshooting trace. troubleshooting, and then you go to trace. So this over here allows you to set up a packet capture for a particular interface, a particular IP address, number of packets. Again, 10,000 is that magic number. Which device are you capturing it from? And I can actually fill these out over here. I want to do, let's say, interface A, my local IP address, the remote IP address, whatever we have, start capture. And it's actually going to do a actual Wireshark trace from your SBC that you can then download. Once it's you hit start capture, it's going to go and say, give it a moment. You can do whatever testing you do, and then there's a box that you can say stop capture, or it's going to automatically stop at 10,000 packets. If I go then to the captures option over here, there's a bunch of PCAP files I can then download and open up in Wireshark if I want to. Again, it's going to be device specific, so you need to know which device is going to be involved. But one thing that I know is very typically a hard thing to figure out is, okay, so I've got this packet capture. What the heck are these interfaces? B1, A1, what the heck does all that mean? If you go to a little tip and trick over here, if you go to the network management, you pick your particular device over here and you see all these different device interfaces over here. If I know that I need to capture some data on A1, or what is A1, I can see A1 over here. Here's the gateway, here's the IP address. So I can tell you right now that interface A1 is going to be on my inside network because I've got the internal IP addresses. The other thing that's very useful in the SBC is the user registrations. So very similar to user registrations in the SBC, in the System Manager, sorry, the SBC also has additional information. So to get to it, I go to the status, and then I go to user registrations. Open this up over here under the AOR, under contains, I can say a particular extension. So this over here, I want to filter by anything with 22528. This shows over here the one phone I have going through my SBC with extension 22528 at MSU.edu. What's neat about this as well is you can go to the details tab, and I can see all sorts of information. The user agent, so which desk phone version am I running? The firmware version of that particular phone. And then I can find out information like, what's my endpoint IP address? Is it currently registered? Is it using TLS? And then if you're doing a lot of work in the SBC, what subscriber flow am I using the last time that I saw this particular IP address? So again, very useful to figure out, is the phone even getting to my SBC before it's getting anywhere else? And I can filter on any of these right here. I can see user 47999 has 2 phones registered through my SBC going to the to my session managers. The other thing that's useful to show in the SBC as well is under status and then server status. You can see over here it shows my adjuncts that I've got connected to this particular SBC. Are they currently up? If they're not up, when is the last time that they failed? What server transport, what port, what IP address, all that type of stuff. So you can get a very holistic view very quickly of, are my adjuncts working that are going through the SBC? I can see right now here, I've got one of them that is not. So very similar to the session manager, there in the SBC also has a tool on the command line that allows you to see real-time traffic. So let me go and pull that up here really quick. Again, I'm going to, here's that file that finally opened up. I can do additional filtering and all that. So I'm going to clear this and then exit out of this and connect to my SBC. This one should be this right here. So the SBC, there is also a trace SBC tool, almost identical to trace SM. It does require you to be a super user on that particular user. So you will need to do the SU command after you SSH in. I'm going to go and put in my password, and then I can type in trace SBC. Now what's neat about the trace SBC tool is, in addition to having the user filters, or like the filters when you're in the actual tool, like the -U and then the extension or -I for IP address, you can also do them command line. Now the advantage of doing command line is it then does not count against your overall buffer. So if I do -U 22528, you're going to see on the bottom over here it says capture filter and display filter. So I can also do display filters on top of that. So I can hit start. I can capture some data. Let's say I can go call in right now, which I should have probably set this up earlier, but I did not. Right here. So if I go call in, we'll see some traffic go across, hopefully, or not. Okay. I'm on probably the wrong SBC because right now it looks like this is one of the dormant ones. So the other thing I wanted to touch base on really quickly as well is, so the SBC also continuously captures all the traffic that's going across it. Let me go jump to my active SBC so we can see some real traffic. SU. So in the path of archive, log, trace SBC, trace SBC, trace SBC, SIP, there is essentially, it's going to be doing a running log of all the SIP traffic going across that device. If I type in LS, you're going to see just a ton of traffic. I'm going to go filter this based off of just like the last little bit over here. If I want to see, let's say a user calls in and says, hey, at 9:30 this morning, there was a problem calling, or I had a problem calling an international number or something. Something happened at a particular time. I can do trace SBC, and I can do archive, log, trace SBC, SIP, and then a name of a log file. So I know this one, between these two right here, so between 9:27 and 9:40, something happened. So I can go and copy and paste that in here. Trace SBC will then open up that file and show you everything that happened between that time span. Now, it only captures this data. It's a rolling log, so depending on how busy your system is, it may be a few days, it might be a few hours, it could be weeks or even months, depending on how much traffic you actually get. So this over here shows all the traffic that happened between those two time spans. If I go filter, again, -U, and I can say 22528, see if anybody called me in that time. Nobody called me at that time. That's great. Or I can say -U 26200. This shows all the calls that happened to that particular number, 432-6200. So that's great if somebody tells you a particular thing. Now, those are also captured, so you can send those logs also to, again, a vendor or something like that if there's a problem. The other quick tool I wanted to show really here, show as well, is the TCP dump. So TCP dump is another tool that you can use to capture live data and open it in a tool like Wireshark. So if I go to the archive directory, I can do TCP dump -I, and then that interface number, A2, B1, whatever. You're probably gonna have to look in your EMS to figure out what that is. If I say A1, and then I say -F, and then I can give it a file name, my log.pcap. I typed something wrong here, but because we're out of time, I'm not going to worry about that. But if you look up the TCP dump to -W, sorry, that's -W. Okay, it's going to be capturing all that data into that file, and then for me to actually be able to download that file, I need to type in the command chown IPCS:IPCS if I'm an IPCS user, and that file name. Now I can go download that and open it up in Wireshark. So unfortunately, I'm pretty much out of time here to actually go into Wireshark and show some of the tools in there, but there's just all sorts of things you can do in a Wireshark. There's a lot of YouTube videos about Wireshark, so you don't have to worry about that. Just talk about Wireshark there. Other ways you can capture data, of course, is like mirroring a network port, viewing data, all that type of stuff. There are network performance monitoring tools such as IR Prognosis, Oracle Enterprise Operations Manager, and then of course Avaya SLA Mon is a great tool if you have active maintenance on your system. What's neat about Avaya SLA Mon, once you have it set up, any modern SIP phone, so the J series phones, 9611s, you can actually instruct SLA Mon to do Wireshark captures right from the phone, download it, and then you can open it up in Wireshark to see what's going on. it's a valuable tool if you are trying to capture stuff in the outside. So that's the SLA Mon. So I'm going to go through the questions list here really quick. So let's see here. The first question we have here from Jose, what is an AST device? I forget what AST stands for. AST is essentially an Avaya device that subscribes to events. So that's going to be any Avaya device besides the 4600 series phones. So any of the 9600s series phones, 96X1s, J series phones, Vantage phones, all that. Is there a tool in the Avaya System Manager to block spam calls other than the denial of service for the SBCE? There is not a tool built into the Avaya system to block spam calls, unfortunately. In my environment, I'm actually using a tool known as Camilio that does some spam blocking. You can manually, if you know a particular phone number is constantly hitting you and spamming you, you can actually go and do a route. So if you go into the dial patterns within the SBC or in System Manager, you can do a route for a particular incoming phone number and route it to, let's say, nowhere. That would block that call, but that is a very manual process. There's another question. I have secure CRT and for all the same reasons I do. How do you get the wonderful colors that you see using PuTTY? In secure CRT, if you go to the terminal emulation, you want to make sure your terminal is Linux. ANSI color, use ANSI scheme, or use the color scheme. And I think that is all that you have to do. I do the color scheme of traditional. I think that's all that you have to worry about. But the key is you need to make sure your emulation is terminal Linux with ANSI color. Okay, does the tool capture ringing sounds? For example, the user states that they receive an external call that displayed a weird ringing sound. This is from Thong. I'm not quite sure about the capturing the ringing sounds. Most of that would be actually an invite is really what I'm thinking that you're thinking about. So you should be getting that information in a invite as opposed to anything else. There's a question, will we be getting the audio of the session? This session has been recorded. Paige, if you're on the call right now, do you have more details on that?
Yeah, so the session was recorded and it will be available for watching and listening on demand within the next hour. So be on the lookout for that. I will send a link to the recording with the PDF presentation to all attendees post-webinar by the end of the day.
Great, well, thank you very much. And I believe that is all the questions we have in the queue. Yeah, so appreciate everybody participating today, and I hope this was useful. Please do give me feedback on how I can make this presentation better. That I always look to improve how I'm doing these things. I realize an hour is not a whole lot of time to cover all this material, but I'm hoping that it was useful. So thank you very much, and have a great day.
Great, thank you, Nick.